Hey everyone, welcome to the Smart Economy Podcast, a production of neonewstoday.com. I'm your host, Dylan Grabowski. In this episode, we were joined by Meg Lister, the general manager at Grant Labs at Gitcoin. Today, we spoke about the success rates that grant funding has over other forms of funding, such as loans or seed capital, the expansion of Gitcoin's sole focus on Ethereum to EVM networks more broadly, Gitcoin's transition from 1.0 to 2.0, and the concurrency between the entities' centralized and decentralized processes, quadratic funding and pool contributors, and so much more. Just a reminder, nothing said on this podcast is a solicitation to buy or sell any tokens, and that nothing should be taken as financial advice. The host or guest may hold tokens discussed in any given episode, and you can check out a disclaimer on www.neonewstoday.com. I also want to give you a heads up and let you know that we experienced some technical difficulties today with internet connection, so please bear with us if there are any parts that seemed choppy or disjointed. Regardless, I really enjoyed this conversation with Meg, and I hope you enjoy the conversation too. Hey everyone, welcome to the Smart Economy Podcast. Today we're joined by Meg Lister, the general manager at Grant Labs at Gitcoin, a platform that has helped serve to disseminate grant funding to more than 4,000 projects. How are you doing today, Meg?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me on today, Dylan.
To kind of give folks some insights into who you are, how you think, why Gitcoin operates the way it does, I want to jump off into kind of like a higher 10,000 foot level question. And that's, how can decentralized blockchain networks and cryptocurrencies help to create a more fair, equitable, and just world?
Yeah. Thanks so much for kicking us off with a thought-provoking question. And also going right to the heart of the reason why I'm in crypto to begin with. And hopefully many of your listeners are too. I think that blockchain networks have a huge role to play, not because they are inherently, I'll call it like better or unbiased or anything like that, but because they are so transparent. And transparency and public, open, accessible data is the heart of accountability in my mind, which is the building block for building more fair, just, and equitable systems.
I love that. Before I was in the crypto space, I was an urban planner and I worked for a Department of Transportation, and we had funding earmarked specifically for like native tribes so that they could build roads and connect to highways. And a lot of the tribes in the Bay Area, which is where I was working before I went into the crypto space, they didn't want to deal with the government agency because they just didn't, there was a history of not trusting this community or this group of planners and the money associated with like the state funding. So there was a lot of distrust that was there. So I love that you kind of leverage blockchain networks to provide that transparency. I guess kind of from your experience, what are the issues with like strings that have been tied to grant funding and the levels of lack of transparency that have existed with this type of funding that has been around before? Like, what are some examples you have of areas where people might not trust where money comes from or where it goes?
Oh my gosh, you just gave such a powerful example, Dylan. And I don't know if I can top that. But something that will probably feel old and familiar to all of our listeners is that grant programs have struggled with this since their very inception. They're amazing on paper. A government, a charitable organization, a wealthy individual says, hey, I'm going to donate $50 million to cure malaria. And everyone's like, oh my God, what an amazing idea. Thank you so much for taking this on. And they earmark the money. That's fantastic. And then a couple of years passed and people are like, hey, where'd that go? Like, what's being done with that money anyway? There was a scandal that hit a Boston University funded anti-racism program in the fall to a very, very well-known and well-respected program that it turned out was not appropriating funds appropriately. And it goes to show you that it's very hard to predict success and predict trustworthiness of both grant givers and grant recipients, which kind of brings us back to this transparency problem and something that I think Web3 is really poised to solve for grant giving and financial accountability overall.
Yeah, I think I have a clue as to what entity you're talking about. And there was a level of personal home buying and things of this nature where funds were being misappropriated, but we don't need to invite the trolls or anyone who has a pro or anti stance when it comes to this organization. So we won't delve further into that. But I love that this is kind of what drives you and why you see Web3, blockchain, crypto, whatever you want to call it, as like the perfect product market fit to provide a solution. But before we kind of like jump into what Gitcoin is, Gitcoin 2.0, and all these great things that you guys have learned over the years and through 20 rounds of grant giving rounds, I do want to just kind of like take a quick step back and hear your genesis. Like, what was the first time you heard about cryptocurrencies? And if you were like me or so many others I've spoken with, you kind of like looked at it and you thought, oh, cool, and then didn't come back for a few years. Maybe that is your story, maybe it's not. So when was the first time you heard about Bitcoin or Ethereum? And then secondarily, what was kind of like your aha moment where it's like, this is where I need to be?
Yeah. I always tell this story and I use the disclaimer, like it's a really dumb Genesis story. So many people have like way better and more profound aha moments. I remember hearing about Bitcoin, maybe 2016 or so. I was working at an ad tech company and there was an engineer on my team who was like, I just keep making money off of Bitcoin. Like I bought some for $300 and it just keeps going up. And I remember looking at it and being like, this is like too good to be true. There's something weird here. And, that was 2016. So it turned out, yep, we learned in 2017 some parts of it were too good to be true. And, fast forward a few years later, I'm still working at the same ad tech company and I'm getting really fed up with it. I'm leading a product line there and just feeling like the way that I am building product, I'm trying to do the right thing by small businesses and help them succeed and grow. But the way that I'm doing this, the way that the ad tech industry inherently respects its users data, its user privacy, are just really not values aligned for me anymore. And it was COVID summer, and so I was ready to blow up my life anyway. And a friend was like, hey, if you're really looking for change, if you really want to blow some stuff up, why don't you look at crypto? And so I was like, yeah, what the hell? I joined a crypto analytics company called Flipside Crypto to build and lead their product team. And that was a phenomenal experience working with that team. And I started building, data products in ways that were really fun and exciting. And still, I got like 6 months into that job and I was like, I don't really get crypto. Like I'm working with crypto data, but I don't like get the industry. I don't get why everyone's so excited about this. It's like bland ad tech at this point. And then I was like, okay, I need to snap out of this bug. So I joined a DAO. And this is probably early 2021. And so DAO tokens are pumping. Everybody's throwing money around. It's a joyful time to be spending a lot of money and not seeing the repercussions. But what it was also doing was just drawing a ton of passionate and like-minded people together, particularly on the DAO scene, and people who were champions of the ideals that you and I started discussing. And that's when it really clicked for me. Like we have really powerful tools at our disposal. We have really passionate people who want to change the world. And there's a really healthy, Venn diagram or almost an ikigai, that's set up here.
Yeah. And so when you studied in school philosophy and environmental studies, which is a very much like ethics, mission oriented kind of field. So do you think that now at Gitcoin, you finally found your ikigai, you found your why I'm here? And maybe for folks who are in school right now or just graduated, what was like that path like? Did you find that when you were at the ad tech company that you were just kind of grinding through it? Or did you find that as like a valuable life experience to help you realize that where you are today is where you wanted to work toward?
Yeah. Oh, that's such a fascinating question. I have to start off by being like, look, I'm a philosophy major and I have a job. Like we can be productive and successful out in the world. I graduated from college and in the US, a couple of months before you graduate, if you've taken out student loans, they haul you into a classroom and they pass you out a packet that shows how much money you owe the government, how long it's going to take you off and how much you pay every month. And I sat in that room going, holy shit. I was picturing a nice life after graduation. Like I was going to buy myself flowers. And so I scrapped my dreams pretty quickly of teaching or working at a nonprofit and got into tech purely for financial reasons, and was very grateful that I wound up loving a lot of my early experiences in tech, and in large part because I had a number of just amazing women-led teams and female mentors that shaped my career and my experience in the workplace early on. And I left the ad tech company. Just best run, most human-centric organization I've ever worked. It was a company out of Boston called WordStream. And what I learned in probably the first 10 years of my career was that it was actually really healthy to separate my passions from my work a little bit. And that I have a lot of, I'll call them like intense type A tendencies. And I think a lot of us who are driven and successful fit this mold too. And marrying that with a passion project can be really dangerous for your well-being. And it was really healthy for me to maintain a little bit of separation there. And I do think that that's, I love my role at Gitcoin. I'm so passionate about what we're doing. And having that passion be closely tied to my work is also a little bit of a struggle in terms of the way that I appropriately balance my work and my life and sleep enough and exercise enough and eat the right foods and all of that stuff that our human bodies demand.
Yeah. And even just taking a day off or a weekend off, it's so hard to kind of plan that into your schedule and into your life. And like the work-life balance could kind of creep out of whack. I've definitely fallen victim to that. I've been in the space since 2018, but you mentioned something that I wanted to touch on later in the conversation, but I'm definitely psyched to jump into this now. When we first launched the Smart Economy podcast in 2022, we were doing series. So I did a DeFi series, a DAO series, and I also did a women in blockchain series. And one of the questions I asked 2 years ago to all four of our awesome women guests were, do you think that Web3 is an industry that lends credence to a more like fair opportunity for both men and women to be on an even playing field? And my thesis was that Web3 is this industry where we go by avatars on crypto Twitter, we go by the repositories and our contributions to GitHub. And so my theory was that this was a more even playing field. Do you find that in your experiences? Like, is this an industry that can be a great equalizer?
Yeah, no offense to present company, because I've heard this a lot and I vehemently disagree with the anonymity and avatar theory. I find that what that setup creates is the default assumption that everybody looks like the most popular quote unquote avatar in our industry. Which is frequently a Western white male, which is how the tech field and the finance fields are generally dominated. And there are so many Western white men out there who I have learned from and love working with. It's, I don't mean to hate on any particular demographic, but when you take away the human characteristics that you associate with someone, in my experience, you wind up getting stereotyped even further and a little bit awkwardly in many scenarios. I think that when we're able to be most straightforward about how we present ourselves in the world and how we'd like to be perceived, that is a truer recipe for inclusion and equal playing fields.
Yeah, I can imagine that if you're an anon on crypto Twitter and you go to your first crypto conference and meet your fans, that first interaction might be a little awkward.
Oh, totally. I briefly went a semi-anon personality on Twitter, and when I first joined DAOs, and I had a female avatar and the screen name CatJam, and I doxed myself for two reasons. One, people kept nicknaming me Cat, and I thought that was really dumb. And the second one is everybody kept referring to me as a he, or being like, "Hey, Sarah." And it's I have an obviously female avatar. That's how far the assumptions went.
Yeah. So I guess before we jump back into Gitcoin and your background, what's a good way that people can be advocates or allies or help kind of break that down if you are a Western white guy like me?
Yeah, I mean, as a Western white woman, I can't say that I've got the true recipe for success here. But one, I think it's just being really thoughtful about, particularly when you're hiring, when you're building teams, when you're building community, about the perspectives and the people that you want included in your team and your community, and deliberately seeking those out. We've been hiring a lot at Gitcoin recently, or we've been hiring a little bit at Gitcoin recently. But in every role, we try to be really thoughtful about our hiring pipelines and are we recruiting in the right spaces to see the diversity of candidates that we want. And I think too, just making space when you are working with people to understand their perspective and their backgrounds and giving them the space to articulate how they want to be treated and communicated with in your work together.
Cool. Thanks for helping me explore this realm of the social realm that is always like kind of there in the background, but sometimes maybe people are afraid to acknowledge or don't even think about it. So I was definitely happy to kind of like delve into this side quest. So we mentioned doxing, and I hope I'm not like doxing what part of the world you live in, but you're in the Northeast.
Yeah.
So I'm just kind of curious, like, are you local? Are you active in like the local blockchain scenes? What's that like in your neck of the woods? Because here in Colorado, obviously, like Gitcoin was, I don't want to say founded out of Colorado, but that's where the founders were located. And so we have quite a robust community here with things like ETH Denver that you announced Gitcoin 2.0 at. So before we delve further into the work that you do, what's just kind of like the local scene like?
Yeah, so I'm in the DC area, and the joke is that there's like 50 crypto fans and 500 crypto haters around here, probably a little bit more than 500, and unfortunately, many of them are employed by the federal government. But I have to say, that being said, we do have a small but really passionate and growing crypto community here. And it's no ETH Denver, but we do have ETH DC coming up on May 14th. And I'm so excited to be speaking on a panel there. We've got folks from the Bitcoin ecosystem, from the Ethereum ecosystem, and across both kind of DeFi, DAOs, novel applications of blockchain, including, I think, space and the creator economy. So it is small but passionate, and just a fabulous place to get involved in policy work, obviously, because it is right on our doorstep. And there are a number of people in Congress and on staff who are looking to better understand the industry and make a change.
Yeah, I hate that, like, as Americans, this has to be a part of the conversation that we have. I mean, we were on the call with our lawyer today to talk about the DOJ brief that just came out and the FBI brief about going after custodial wallet providers, and MetaMask and Consensus suing the SEC, and the SEC being a rogue agency. And it takes away from kind of like our ability to think about other issues. But that being said, I did fly out in December with Stand With Crypto that Coinbase is helping fund.
Oh, amazing.
To speak. Yeah, to help educate at least our legislators here in Colorado. So it's nice to hear that there's more permanent boots on the ground in that neck of the woods that are advocates for this industry and the good that it can perform. Because there's always bad with everything, but there also needs to be the lightness with the dark. And I don't think that always gets conveyed. So it's fantastic to hear that you're there, you're on the ground, and that ETHDC is actually a thing that I'd never even heard of until just now. Another education kind of forum that you are a part of is Rehash. So what is Rehash? It's a podcast, but what is like your level of contribution with the entity? How does it help disseminate information? Maybe you can shamelessly plug where people can listen to it.
Yeah, this is another wonderful thing about crypto is the opportunity to collaborate over, compete, and chill another podcast while we're recording a podcast. But thank you so much for that, Dylan. Rehash is what we call the first community-owned podcast in Web3. It was started by Diana Chen, who was previously at Unstoppable Domains, and she's been prolifically recording podcasts at Unstoppable, at Rabbit Hole, across the industry and in Web2 for a number of years. And Diana got to the point where she was like, I've recorded hundreds of episodes and there isn't a single one that I actually own. And so she has started Rehash and gave herself and the community full ownership over the podcast from the start. And so Rehash produces 12 episodes a season, somewhere between 10 and 12. Yeah. 4 seasons a year. And for the topics and the guests, those are entirely voted on by the community. And so we have a system where anyone who's part of the community can nominate a guest. And then anyone who holds a Rehash NFT or has collected a podcast can vote on those guests. And it's produced some absolutely fabulous conversations. It's like the real alpha rather about what crypto insiders care about is the topics and the people that get voted on to Rehash every season. And we covered everything from DeFi to Cat Young's ETH evacuations project last week. And it's just, I have to say, I play a very small part in it. I do kind of operations to help Diana out behind the scenes, but a fabulous community to be part of.
That's super cool. Yeah, I mean, even with this pod, I've tried to like follow trends and curate the lists, the guests that we've had. So like 2022 was very much focused on like what's next for regulations and things like that. And then 2023 was really like digging into how builders are collaborating with institutions and what does the institutions coming on board look like. Mm-hmm. So do you kind of have just like a finger on the pulse for what the general trend has looked like for the crypto industry over the types of guests that have come on? Or is it very much just kind of a shotgun approach and the community is all over the place in who they want to hear on the pod?
I have to say the community tends to be all over the place, but in a really good way and in a way where when you watch the results come out, you're like, oh, like this is actually a fantastic, snapshot of what people are thinking about and where the alpha is. And so the community does lean a bit more towards consumer crypto than and I would say consumer crypto DAO's kind of non-technical focus versus maybe the larger crypto community as a whole. We have over the last 2 seasons had a lot more DeFi content than usual, which has been a really exciting way to see, like DeFi is actually appealing to a wider segment of individuals again. There are some cool new innovations coming out in DeFi, and also it doesn't hurt that the market's picking up and people tend to be more interested in making money when it's pumping.
Nice. Are there any other kind of like Web3 projects you're affiliated with or associated with? I'm sure that Gitcoin takes up 99% of your time, but just curious.
It does right now. I am always looking to get involved with mentorship opportunities for women in the space and have done that a bit in the past, but not currently.
Awesome. My girlfriend's a mentor in the data and analytics space. So it's always fun when she gets a new grad student to kind of help nerd out with and guide along the path. Sweet. So I kind of want to ask like a philosophical question about technology right now. And really kind of what's your thesis on the significance of the Ethereum virtual machine and the blockchain space? And me working in a non-EVM ecosystem, I'm always curious and fascinated to hear the answer to this question. Is EVM a winner-take-all solution?
Oh, that's so interesting. This is another area where I hope that we get to a more collaborative versus competitive fight moving forward. It does feel like as long as the EVM has been around, there's been a hotbed of competition, both EVM and non-EVM, and then also within the EVM itself and the competition that we see in the L2 landscape right now, or in some competition in the F-chain landscape. I think that there are some really interesting developments by the Solana ecosystem with Neon, by the Near ecosystem with Aurora, Polkadot, and Moonbeam to create EVM compatible chains that will allow for more interoperability between EVM and non-EVM ecosystems. And I hope that the EVM does the same thing and creates compatible chains for other ecosystems. In my mind, it's more about the right tools for the job. And so the Solana or the Cosmos ecosystem being an amazing fit for like high throughput consumer crypto, which may have a lower need for trust and decentralization. And the EVM being a fit for more, a DAO-based, DeFi-based, high trust, high decentralization apps. Or who knows what the winners will be on either side. Yeah.
I think that Gitcoin is kind of representative of this ever-growing landscape. If we think like governments or even Bitcoin core development, things take so long to go through. But ultimately, like if you look back, they were reacting to where the puck is going, if we're going to use a hockey term. And so with Gitcoin transitioning from 1.0 to 2.0, kind of the mission and vision of the ecosystem, the Gitcoin ecosystem, is transitioning away from let's empower Ethereum to let's empower EVM. So you're kind of already like going towards this multi-chain world. So what was like the thought process like? When did everybody at Gitcoin kind of like put their head down and be like, maybe we should expand the vision of empowering Ethereum to empowering like this core technology that allows other blockchain networks, L1s and L2s, to become a thing?
Yeah, this predates my time at Gitcoin, but one of the core, realizations or drivers of Gitcoin 2.0 is Gitcoin had operated, as you mentioned, this grants program that benefited the Ethereum ecosystem for a couple of years. One of the very first grants programs in Ethereum, actually. And it got to the point where the grants program was growing and really successful. And other organizations that were creating grants programs kept coming to Gitcoin and being like, hey, do you guys run this thing? Like, can you tell me how to do it? Do you have any tools I can use? And the folks at Gitcoin were like, oh my God, like we're sitting on something that's actually much bigger than the Gitcoin grants programs. We can help any EVM-based community create, manage, and grow their own grants program. And we feel really strongly about this mission because we believe so much in the power of the Ethereum community and in the growth potential of Web3. We see grants programs as a key driver of that growth. And so we realized, hey, if we kind of expand our focus beyond the Gitcoin grants programs into grants programs as a whole, we'll increase the impact that we have on the EVM ecosystem dramatically.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to just give you and your team a shout out. It's your impact goes beyond just EVM. So my day job is in the Neo ecosystem. It's a non-EVM ecosystem. And we have a community funding DAO called Grant Shares. And Gitcoin was kind of like the basis for how can we build, how can our platform look when we want to create and distribute and disseminate grants as well. So just know that maybe even if you're not having like direct communication with other non-EVM ecosystems, that Gitcoin is kind of like that torch that's lighting the way. Mm-hmm. And so I'm really curious to hear your perspective on this, because we've seen like companies and projects and products come through and receive grant funding, and that they usually build, but maybe they don't always take off. So like, what does success look like for you with grant distribution? Because I've seen personally that we don't have 100% success rate with the products that we funded, but we did give somebody a chance. We did give a team a shot. And to me, you plant 1,000 seeds and hopefully one or two will grow. So, personally speaking, it's not a big deal to me, but I'm just kind of curious to hear your thoughts on that, about like the efficacy of grants.
Yeah. You're totally right that no source of funding is ever going to have 100% success rate. And one of the reasons why we get so excited about grant funding, in particular, is because we've created this like multi-year longitudinal study through the Gitcoin grants program. And even though we weren't especially good at giving out grants when we started, we've gotten better along the way. We've increased that success rate. And what we see looking over the last 5 years is that for every $1 million given in grant funding, there are 13 active developers still in the Ethereum ecosystem, which is pretty wild. I mean, even if you break that down in terms of like acquisition costs and compare that to a developer's annual salary, like that's a pretty good figure. And then you contrast that with something like VC funding. There's $76 billion dollars of that have poured into the ecosystem. And you get about a tenth of a developer per $1 million when you look at that. And so nothing is ever going to be 100%, but grant funding, seems to outperform many traditional forms of funding. And that's, in my opinion, because the allocators are so close to what the community needs And so they're funding things that are in the appropriate area, and they're building up kind of familiarity with the community, trust in the projects that they're funding, and just taking better and better shots on goals because they have so much more subject matter expertise and understanding of kind of community or market needs.
Yeah, I love that you brought that stat up. It's something that actually like really jumped out to me in the Gitcoin 2.0 white paper, which I highly suggest everybody go read and check out. It's phenomenal to think that like a scrappy little grant can actually have more of an impact than like some massive amount of VC funding. So you kind of touched on this, but like, why is that? What is a benefit that a grant gives over something that might have ties to it, like a loan or VC funding?
Yeah. So the thing that you bring up about ties has been actually extensively studied in Web2, and they see a much higher long-term impact when there are no ties associated with a funding source in many of these Web2 studies. And so the idea that you build trust with a highly reputable individual and you give them the funds and discretion to spend that money in the best way possible. I think what's really powerful about Web3 is that we can take this further, we can trust, and we could also verify. Again, that's transparency that we've been talking about. We have new ways to track impact metrics, to provide kind of on-chain reporting about the impact and power of the grant, which just allows us to iterate and get better and better about our funding decisions over time. I do think that some grant programs index on deliverables and needing people to produce certain outcomes in order to get funded, which may be a great way to build trust with the community, particularly as funding starts to be allocated. But the more that you can index on outcomes and on impact, the better off you'll be and the more impactful you'll be.
Cool. So before we dig into Gitcoin 2.0, I just kind of want to give you an opportunity to shill some of the successes that have come out of this this ecosystem. A lot of crypto native name brands have emerged because they got their start in Gitcoin. I could list off some, but I kind of want to hear you shill some of your favorites and kind of like the sources of pride for how a grant enabled something to emerge as kind of like a household name to the crypto native today.
Yeah, so many of the DeFi 1.0 players emerged from Gitcoin grant programs. So, little guys like Uniswap and OneEdge were Gitcoin grant recipients back in the day. There's also individuals like Zach XBT, who does fabulous reporting and investigative journalism, got their start via the Gitcoin Grants program. And I can't wait to see what superstars come out of this in the next cycle.
I did not know that Zach had his genesis with support from Gitcoin. I think he's an invaluable service to the crypto industry. And I think I've even seen like portions of his research being used in like federal indictments or something like that.
I think so. And all goes to show that he should be well compensated for his work.
Absolutely. Should not be doing work for free. So before we kind of like dig in further to like the work that you do specifically with Grants Labs, can you just highlight like what the major migration or shift was from Gitcoin 1.0 to Gitcoin 2.0?
Yeah, so Gitcoin 1.0 was really defined by our core grants program. And so Gitcoin was giving grants to the Ethereum ecosystem and only giving out grants using a quadratic funding mechanism, which is an awesome mechanism. It was developed by Vitalik Buterin and Glenn Weil in an awesome white paper back in 2019 or so. But it's far from the only mechanism for grants funding. And so Gitcoin 2.0 is defined by the multiple types of grant funding mechanisms that we offer. So not only quadratic funding, but retro public goods funding, direct grants, exploring many other funding mechanisms at the moment too. It is available not just for Ethereum ecosystem, but any EVM compatible chain in the Ethereum community. And the last thread is that it's decentralized. Gitcoin underwent an internal transformation from a centralized corporation into a DAO in 2021. And while that has been quite a transition, it's really strengthened the community and the participation in Gitcoin.
Awesome. And that was a fantastic description. And I just kind of want to take a step back and provide like a definition for someone who's listening to the show who might not have ever contributed to Gitcoin or even a grants distribution platform. Can you just kind of like Eli 5 or elevator pitch what quadratic funding is?
Yeah, quadratic funding is a democratic way of distributing funding. So the core idea is that whoever is being the primary funder of the grant creates a matching pool. And so if I'm funding grants and I've got $1 million to spend, instead of deciding myself how I'm going to allocate $1 million between 25 different projects, instead I'm going to create a matching pool. And I'll set eligibility criteria for who qualifies for the matching pool. And I'll make sure that I'm accepting or rejecting applications because I know kind of the parameters of how I want the money to be spent. But I'm actually going to trust a community or a larger group of decision makers to allocate those funds appropriately. And so just to give you a totally random example, maybe I'm supporting open source software in Web3. And so I put my $1 million up and I accept maybe a couple hundred programs into the round. And I let the Ethereum community as a whole decide how my $1 million should be allocated. And one of the superpowers of quadratic funding is people actually vote with their dollars. And so if I'm a supporter of a couple of different projects, I'm going to donate $2 to one of them and $5 to another and $10 to another. And those votes count, or those donations rather, count as votes towards the projects that should be receiving funding. And there's a formula in quadratic funding that takes the square root of the donation amount as the number of votes cast towards that project, which prevents a super wealthy donor from swaying the vote count dramatically.
Mm-hmm. And so I love quadratic funding because my $5 can sometimes be worth 5x that when I'm contributing to a project that I really want to see thrive and survive and grow. So on the other half of that, what are the types of entities that are contributing this $1 million or whatever to this pool? Are you finding, is it like wealthy whales that were ETH-ICO contributors? Is it like existing industries that have been around for 50 plus years? Is it a combination of both? Who are the types of donors?
Yeah, so in the example I gave for the Gitcoin grants open source software matching pool, we receive contributions from people who basically care about the thriving of innovation in the Ethereum ecosystem itself. And so these could be well-established projects that are donating because they think that they're going to fuel innovation, people actually building on top of their projects, or people who are building infrastructure and tooling that people building in their ecosystems are going to need. One of the great things about the Ethereum community is there's a strong feeling of a rising tide lifts all boats. And that rising tide is the innovation of the open source software grants program. There are many other people too who decide to fund a matching pool themselves and to actually be grant operators in the same way that Gitcoin is a grant operator. And so a lot of the ones that we see today are organizations with large tokenized treasuries who are looking for growth. So they're L2s, they're DeFi protocols, they're some of the emergent organizations that are about to release a token and want to engage the community and grow their ecosystem after token launch. Lots of other emerging ecosystems too that are ripe for innovation and development, like DePIN or like GameFi as well.
So who are some of the partner ecosystems? I noticed like Arbitrum kind of has, are they affiliated with the current Gitcoin grants round? Are they kind of doing their own thing? Can you just kind of like explain how like an L2 or another ecosystem might be able to piggyback off of what Gitcoin's doing?
Yeah. So the answer to your question is yes, both of them. Arbitrum is both participating in the current round as well as doing many of their own funding rounds through Gitcoin. And they are providing matching funds to smaller grant rounds that are running on Arbitrum. And so many of our community rounds receive funding both from Gitcoin, from their own treasuries, and then also from the Arbitrum community. Arbitrum has also run many of its own grants rounds through Gitcoin, as have other L2s in the space as well.
So I think maybe the grants rounds might have been a decision before your time at Gitcoin, but can you just kind of share from a higher level perspective why we're doing grants rounds right now? As at the time of recording, we're currently going through GG20 right now. So clearly it's a structure that Gitcoin likes and wants to continue using. So can you just kind of like share the genesis of why there are grants rounds?
Yeah. So the reason that we do these on a regular basis is that we want to provide a kind of predictable source of funding for projects that are innovating in the space. And so we're now running the open source software round once every 6 months to give people time to make progress and show impact, as well as providing a home for community rounds, which are rounds that qualify to receive funding both from Gitcoin and from their own treasuries quarterly, about 4 times a year.
Awesome. So what is like can you share any insights into the types of projects or the types of folks who have been submitting for funding in GG20?
Yeah, so we have some awesome participants in the open source software round, and I believe we have almost 300 accepted projects, which is fantastic. And so one category that we're trying this round for the first time is hackathon winners. And so people who have successfully completed a hackathon and are looking to take their idea for the next stage, there's a dedicated pool of funding for them. And we have about 30 awesome projects in that pool that I'm really excited about.
Yeah, that's super cool. I have participated as a judge and a panelist in a handful of hackathons. And it's so unfortunate when you see an amazing idea kind of just like flounder away because they didn't have any ongoing support. So this kind of ties into a larger theme, I think. And there's so much that money can do, but there's support in terms of technical resources, knowledge, and things like that. So is there other tools in the pipeline that Gitcoin helps offer for, in this particular instance, when we're talking about hackathon projects? Are there other resources like subject matter experts or industry veterans who can help walk a fledgling project through the initial stages from ideation to seed to MVP?
That's such a great point. Money is one of, a handful of things that a project or an entrepreneur needs to succeed. Right now, Gitcoin wants to get really good at what we're calling capital allocation, or smart and effective ways of distributing funding to different projects. And we'd always love to partner with organizations that are looking to provide other sources of support for grantees. One of the great things about the grants program is that it not only delivers money to projects, but it also delivers a strong signal to the community about what projects are up and comers and should be recipients of additional funding or support. And so some of that kind of naturally occurs as an output of the grants program. But we'd always be interested in partnering with anybody who's offering other forms of support to our grantees.
And you might have mentioned this in one of the few times we got cut off in the conversation today, but with Gitcoin 2.0, there was kind of like, there was a focus on a DAO. And then from what I've been able to gather, Grants Labs is kind of like the more centralized institution. So can you just maybe highlight or maybe share a little bit more about the relationship between the DAO and labs?
Yeah, that's a great question. We, like many DAOs over the time, has found that some activities work really well in a bottoms-up community-run format, and some activities do not. It's no surprise that many ecosystems have tried to kind of separate the activities that go into governance and community engagement with the activities that go into product development. And so Grants Labs is a member of the DAO and a contributor to the DAO, but we operate a little bit differently than some of the other DAO activities. And so we have a small agile team that is funded by the DAO and accountable by the DAO, but works in a more kind of traditional business structure and houses some of our quote unquote traditional business functions.
Cool. And so what's kind of like beyond that, what's the relationship? Does the DAO kind of drive the vision and the mission of labs, or is labs kind of, it's assumed that this is going to be an autonomous entity that is just going to act on the goodwill on behalf of the projects that are seeking funding of the DAO and anything else that's associated? Are you guys kind of like given free rein to operate, given the understanding that you're going to be good actors on behalf of everything in the Gitcoin ecosystem?
Yeah, just like we're talking about with grants funding, the principle here is trust but verify. And so all of the groups that are funded and empowered by the DAO should assume a high degree of ownership and autonomy over their work. But what is so key is keeping the community updated, seeking community feedback, and reporting back and ultimately being held accountable for results by the community, which in our case is the GTC token holders.
Awesome. And so is GG20 the first grants round with this new structure of labs and DAO?
Oh, it's actually a great example of a really collaborative effort across labs, DAO, and community. And so Labs has assumed kind of operational oversight over the program. And we make the process and the schedule and push the buttons. The DAO is responsible for community engagement and grantee and donor happiness. And then the community actually has really large strategic oversight over the program. And so the community, we elected a council this season that was responsible for allocating funds towards all of the community rounds that were selected to run as part of the Gitcoin grants program.
Yeah, so I guess it's maybe a little too soon to ask if there are any kind of like aha moments or key lessons learned.
Oh, like everything in DAO life, everything seems really exciting. And then you get into it and you realize that it's a lot of the same boring lessons that we've learned otherwise. And so in our case, we're still learning a lot about how to best communicate and collaborate across groups. We, of course, want to encourage the ownership and autonomy that I was talking about, but maintain really strong communication so that both or all parts of the organization are understanding how each other are driving towards our shared vision.
Awesome. And so I also wanted to touch upon the Allo protocol. It's an open source protocol that enables groups to transparently allocate pooled capital. So is Allo kind of a thing that Gitcoin was working on before 2.0? Is it the result of this new era of Gitcoin? Maybe if I'm completely off basis, you could just share what Allo protocol is and how it fits into the whole Gitcoin ecosystem umbrella.
Yeah, so Allo protocol is kind of the foundational layer of our product offering. It's what our app is built on, which is what our program uses to fund grants. And so Allo protocol is what we call a capital allocation, pun intended there, protocol, where anyone can develop a strategy for allocating resources to a particular group or set of groups. Using mechanisms that they choose, like we talked earlier about quadratic funding, retroactive public goods funding, or badge holder voting, or even just direct grants. And so while we are kind of the first and early users of our protocol, our long-term goal is that many organizations are developing their own strategies and their own apps on top of it and creating kind of an ecosystem of capital allocation.
And so by the time this episode airs, GG20 will be over, but yeah, obviously we're on the 20th round, so there will be more. Who are the folks that should be interested in looking towards future rounds? Who do you guys want to hear from? Are there types of projects or builders or entities that you're seeking to incentivize? What's just kind of like the general who should be applying?
Yeah. So next time we run, it will be a totally community focused round. And what this means is that communities will pledge a certain amount of funding from their own treasury, which can be $1 or more, and Gitcoin will pledge to match that with up to $25,000. And so this is the community elected council that I talked about that's deciding which organizations qualify for these matching funds. And so I'm not part of the council. The council is made up entirely of non-core contributors to the Gitcoin DAO. And so I can't speak to what they want to fund, but I'd be really excited if the output was around funding innovation in the Ethereum ecosystem, particularly around account abstraction or multi-chain tooling, or journalism, which is one of the things that I think is underfunded in the community generally.
Yeah, I agree. So kind of like wrapping up and zooming out, Gitcoin 2.0 was announced at ETH Denver. So what was the reception like? And it's now been 2.5 months since ETH Denver. So has that kind of excitement that came from that reception, has it carried forward? Has it remained strong? What's kind of like the 3 months in perspective?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it's been 3 months. We have all been so excited about Gitcoin 2.0. and about our shared vision for the future. We are in the process of doing the hard work to make Gitcoin 2.0 a reality. And so that's the unglamorous work behind the scenes of setting our goals and strategies to accomplish that. And I'm so excited about the progress the team has made. I feel like we are aligned in a way that we haven't been before and moving with an urgency that we haven't seen before, having this shared vision and North Star, which is not to say that everything's easy or going smoothly, but if it was easy, everybody would be doing it.
And I feel like I've asked a lot of pointed questions about Gitcoin 2.0 and a lot of the work that you've done. But I'm curious, is there something that I haven't asked? Is there something that is significant to you that hasn't been brought up in these in the questions I've been asking you?
Oh, you've had such wonderful and thoughtful questions. And I don't think I have anything to add to your list.
Not a problem at all then. So kind of like looking forward, in crypto, we're always looking for the next thing. So what's on the roadmap for you guys? What's on the roadmap for Grants Labs, for Gitcoin, for the DAO, anything that you can share?
Yeah, well, we're looking forward to meeting a bunch of friends and customers at EPCC this summer, thinking about some live in-person Quadratic funding events this summer. Looking forward to some mechanism evolution that I mentioned earlier, introducing new ways to fund grants, and really bringing our product from good to great. We launched this product last summer, and it's in a spot where, hey, we've resolved a lot of bugs and we've polished it up a little bit, but we have the opportunity to really turn it into something great, and that makes me very excited.
Well, Meg, this was a fascinating conversation. I was really excited to have not just you join the pod, but to also catch up with what's been going on with Gitcoin. The last time I interviewed anyone from Gitcoin was a couple of years ago. So it's been fantastic to see the growth that has happened with the team and the ecosystem. So for anybody who has gotten psyched on listening to this today and they want to build and they want to start their project, and they want to go after some Gitcoin funding, what's the best way that folks can connect with you or connect with the Gitcoin ecosystem in general?
Yeah, well, you can always find us on Twitter or Farcaster. I'm at Meg Lister on Twitter, at CareJam on Farcaster, and Gitcoin is at Gitcoin in both places. You can also find out about grant opportunities at explorer.gitcoin.co. If you're looking to apply for funding or get connected to ecosystems that are looking for you. And I'm looking forward to seeing everyone on the internet and in the grants ecosystem.
Awesome. Meg, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I also want to give kudos to dealing with the technical difficulties that we've gone through. It's definitely going to up our chops in both being a podcast guest and a podcast host. I really appreciate everything.
Oh, thanks so much to you for doing the same.
Well, what did you think of that conversation? I thought it was fascinating to hear more about Gitcoin's longitudinal study and how they found that grant funding can have a higher success rate for developer retention, even compared to billions and billions of dollars that were contributed through VCs. I also really enjoyed learning more about Meg's perspective on finding a career in an industry that is more mission aligned with the individual. And it was also super cool to hear more about Meg's extracurricular activities, not only with the Rehash podcast, but also with local initiatives in Washington, D.C. To keep up to date with the podcast, head over to www.smarteconomypodcast.com. And if you like the guests that we've had on the show, please consider showing your support by giving the show a rating, a thumbs up, and a review on your favorite podcasting platform. Every rate, review, and like helps us get the Smart Economy podcast in front of more ears and eyes. And of course, if you're a NEO token holder, please consider voting for NEO News Today as your council representative. We have proudly been serving the NEO ecosystem since 2017, and will continue to do so by putting portions of our council rewards directly back into ecosystem growth initiatives. With all that said, I want to thank you so much for giving us the time to listen to the Smart Economy podcast, and we're already looking forward to catching you on the next episode.